Hello and welcome to Conversations from the ANF podcast. In this episode, we cross the Atlantic to speak to Brady. He shares his experience of adoption as a 13-year-old and how that informed his understanding of adoption. With his wife Andrea, Brady then went on to adopt internationally as well as through the US foster care system, and has subsequently set up a charity, Rod's Heroes, that helps find families for children with Down syndrome who aren't living with their parents. Brady is open and honest in relation to his beliefs and his motivation, and is very comfortable to engage in discussion. There are many strands to this story, and we really hope you enjoy it. As always, if you have experience of adoption, fostering, or special guardianship from any perspective, personal or professional, and would like to share that on the podcast, please do get in touch through our Facebook page, Twitter, or you can email us at andfpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, so my name's Brady Murray. I live in the United States, in the state of Utah. I would say best to describe myself, I am an adoptee. I was adopted when I was 13 years old. I was actually born Brady Gomez and am now Brady Murray. I have been happily married for 21 years now. My wife and I have 7 beautiful, amazing children, 3 of which are adopted. 2 children we adopted through foster care here in the United States. 1 child we adopted from China when he was 4 years old. And so in addition to that, we're in the process of adopting 4 more children from Colombia, a sibling group of 4, ages 16, 14, 11, and 9. So that'll give us 11 kids, which is even weird here in Utah. Utah's famous for lots of kids and families, big families, but 11's even a lot here in Utah. So that's a little bit about my background.
I mean, this podcast could go in so many directions, right? So there's maybe 5 or 6 episodes in all of that. So can I start at the beginning? Because again, you talked about being, Brady Gomez, this 13-year-old boy, which from a UK perspective, we talk about children being old adoptees when they're 6, children being adopted at that age. So 13, tell me.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a unique situation. My mother and my father were married at a very young age, and they had me. And after I was 2 months old, they separated and they got divorced. And so I went with my mother, and my father, Danny Gomez, went, a separate way. We still have a great relationship still to this day. He was an active part in my life all growing up. And so the question has to be asked, well, how did the adoption thing come about then? And so my mother met a man by the name of Reed Murray when I was about 4 years old. And Reed and I hit it off right from the get-go. In fact, my mom often says that she believes that my dad, Reed, wanted to marry her more so because he liked me so much. And the fact that he got to marry my mom was a secondary benefit to getting to be a dad to me. And so Reed was very much a father figure to me right from the get-go. My earliest memories are of my father, Reed, and him caring for me. And it's kind of a unique thing. So my family, the Gomez family, my grandparents English was a second language. They spoke Spanish. And so I would consider myself Latino in that respect. And my father, my adoptive father, Reed Murray, is a big, tall, blonde hair, blue-eyed, about as American looking as you could possibly get. And so we looked a lot different, but we were very, very close in that regard. And so throughout my childhood, I always called him Dad. And when I was about the age of, call it 12 or 13, I just felt strongly in my heart that I wanted to make it official and have him adopt me. And so I asked him if he'd be open to that. He was very excited when I asked him that, and that's how I got adopted.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite remarkable, because being led by yourself. Was that complicated in relation to your biological dad? Says you maintained that contact with him.
Yeah, that's a great question. I consider myself of having 2 fathers, and I would see my biological father 2 or 3 times a year on average growing up. And those times would be typically on a Friday evening. He would pick me up on his way home from work. He worked far away from his house, and he would travel long distances to come home on the weekends. And we lived a number of hours away from each other. So he'd make his way to my house, pick me up on a Friday after work, and I'd be with him Saturday. And then on Sunday, when he's going back to another state to work, he'd take me back home. So our time together would typically be 36 to 48 hours maximum. And we do that typically 2 to 3 times a week. And one thing that I love about my birth father, Danny, is that he was always extremely supportive of me, and he was very appreciative of Reed and the work that Reed, my adoptive father, was doing on my behalf. I wouldn't say that they were friends by any means. There's complications, as you can imagine, that are associated with that. But Danny, my biological father, was always very, very appreciative of my dad, Reed. And so when I asked my dad, Danny, my biological father, for his blessing, I was physically ill leading up to that. I was very nervous. I could only imagine what that might be like for him, because I knew my dad loved me very much. I knew that. And even though we weren't together often, I knew he loved me. And I remember talking to my mom about that. And she said, when you're ready, I'll call him, and then I'll hand the phone to you and you can talk to him. And seriously, I was physically ill on that moment. And my mom pushed the buttons on the phone and handed me the phone, and I could hear my dad's voice on the other side. And, I was 13 years old. I was awkward 13-year-old that you could imagine. And I just remember saying, Dad, I want to get adopted by Reed, and I want to ask if you would be okay with that. And he showed how a father's love works. And he, without reservation, said, son, I want more than anything for you to be happy. And if this is what you want, this is what I want for you. And I 100% will support you. And it's okay. You call yourself whatever you want to call yourself. And just know that you'll always be my son. I will always be your father, and that nothing can ever change that. And he gave me his blessing. And so that was an example for me of a father's love. And I'm extremely thankful for my dad for doing that for me.
I mean, it's remarkable. And it sounds, that relationship, that sort of three-way relationship, potentially you got the best of all worlds there.
That's exactly right. I feel like I truly am one person that has two fathers, and I've been blessed to have two dads.
So was that complicated from the point of view of your origins, or was it just that because you could hold these two sort of streams, these two identities, that they made a third? Were there other children okay with that?
I would say that it was very complicated, and it still, even to this day, is complicated. I'm 44 years old now, and there's still complications that exist within that. I remember, so growing up in the 80s and the early 90s as Brady Gomez, in a very small rural farming community, that at the time existed a fair amount of racism. And so immigrant workers would come from Mexico, and so Latinos would come from, south of the border and come up there and work. And oftentimes in the culture, as much as I hate to admit this, as part of that culture, they were looked down upon, and there were derogatory things that were said, or they were treated. And I remember being not actually liking to go by the name of Brady Gomez growing up, because of the target that would put on my back for my classmates of, me. And so that was a complicated thing. And then growing up and getting to adulthood, and then actually really gaining an understanding of my family heritage and where my family came from, and like the work ethic that exists within my family. That was an empowering experience to be able to learn about that, and learn about my forefathers, and learn about how hard worker my father, my uncles, my grandparents, etc. were. And that has become an integral part of who I am. And so a part of me longs to have that Gomez name in that respect. And then in the other aspect of it, that everything that I was entrusted and blessed with growing up came from my Murray family and my father, Reed. And so it's a very complicated thing, definitely. And I can respect and understand and appreciate how adoptees feel, because I feel very much the same way in many regards.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but feel like you've got such an informed position, haven't you, in relation to you as then becoming an adoptive parent. So I'm conscious there's an awful lot of ground to cover. We feel like we're skimming across these issues. We could stay here and have a right good natter. So then you get married. You get married, and you have your own children. But had adoption, the idea to adoption, had that always been floating around, or was that just something that you'd kind of parked somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Andrea and I, my amazing wife, my soulmate, when we were dating, we spoke openly about adoption. And we both knew that was something that we felt like we were going to do. And for me, I loved the idea of adoption because of what a blessing adoption was in my life, and what a blessing Reed, my adoptive father, was in my life, and still is to this day. And I believe in this idea of serving the pain that you know best, and that we're entrusted with these types of hardships or life experiences for the blessing of being able to serve other people and help other people that are facing a similar circumstance to be able to get through that. So adoption was something I definitely wanted to do, and Andrea wanted to do. And so it only seemed natural that we would adopt. And lo and behold, here we are on the verge of having 11 kids, with 7 of them being adopted. I wouldn't have guessed that. I'll say that. I couldn't have seen that when we were first married.
Yeah, that little acorn has grown into not just a tree, a sort of little forest.
That's right.
For sure. So can you run me through then the process of you talked about it being, you have your own children, which is, in of itself, no mean feat. You've got a little gaggle of kids there. And what was the kind of the spark that said, actually, now we need to, did you become foster carers after that?
Yeah. So there was 3 sparks that actually happened in our journey thus far. The first was our first son was born. So we have 4 biological children, 1 daughter, our oldest, 3 sons. Our first son was born, and this was in 2007. And about 10 minutes after Nash was born, we found out that he has Down syndrome. And that was something that I wasn't prepared for. That was something that created significant raw emotion within me. And under this concept of serving the pain that I know best, my wife and I knew that this was potentially a hardship, but we also felt in our hearts that this could be a tremendous blessing. And so we leaned in. We were all in. And we got very involved with the Down syndrome community. And when Nash was 4, so over the first 4 years, we were just so involved in the Down syndrome community. We learned about what transpires for children like our son in many developing countries, which is when a diagnosis of Down syndrome or a similar disability is given, that oftentimes the family will immediately abandon that child. And so in 2011, we started a nonprofit organization to help orphaned children that have Down syndrome find a loving home. And that actually, we've been doing that now since 2011. We've helped just shy of 100 kids with Down syndrome get adopted. And one of those children, ironically enough, is our son. So we adopted another boy with Down syndrome in 2016 from China. And his name is Cooper, and he's just a rock star. So that was our first introduction into adoption. And so the second,
I'm going to have to ask some questions here, because there's so much going on. There's so much going on, right? So you obviously, your first son is born, and as you say that, I can't begin to imagine the sort of the shock, the palpable shock, and just life turned on a dime. So I'm down with the Americans there. Dime. I was going to
That's
say a
right.
penny,
Good
but
job.
dime.
I didn't
Yeah.
connect
Oh,
that. You are down. That's good.
I tell you, I'm on fire. Um, so that turns your life around, and as you say, some people respond to that really, differently. But you don't know how you're gonna respond to what is a life altering experience. But then you went on to have three more biological children amidst that. Is that
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we had two more biological children. So daughter, son, and then two biological sons after that. So we have four biological kids.
right? So I mean, a lot of people kind of go, that's a good that's a good family. There's a lot going on there, and and you've got a child with additional needs. Some people will kind of go, well, hey, we've that's it. We've got the Murray brood here. Everything's
That's right.
everything's fine. What then? I'm just intrigued to know how the
Yeah.
next step really that
So
inspires you to keep going.
yeah,
You're not busy enough.
we when we had those promptings, those feelings come in our heart when we had four children that we should consider adoption. We knew we wanted to adopt, and we were great having five children or even six children. My wife always said, I want five children. So it just made sense that we would adopt. And
Yeah,
so we believe wholeheartedly in prayer and in meditation and just in really trying to seek out what we're supposed to be doing. And so as we really sought in our quiet moments in our life what we were supposed to do, the feeling came in our heart that we should consider adopting a child with Down syndrome, having two. And I'll tell you right now, that was not logical. That was not logical. And I'm a very
yeah,
logical person. I'm a planner. And, 1+1 in that case did not equal two. This was just not something that seemed like we should do. But yet,
yeah,
every time that I sought just guidance and inspiration to know what I was supposed to do and follow that in my heart, it just became clear in my mind and in my heart that we were supposed to adopt another child with Down syndrome. And so I was a bit fearful. I felt inadequate. I felt unprepared, but I knew in my heart that's what I was supposed to do. So we went for it. And fast forward now, Cooper's been with us the last 6 years. It's almost 7 years now. And he is just, I can't imagine my life without my son, Cooper. And I wouldn't trade him for anything in the world. So it was absolutely the right decision, even though it was not logical.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Sometimes things don't have to make sense, do they? If you know what I mean.
That's right.
Can I then? I think and I'll talk from a UK perspective and ask questions. I'm thinking that people from a UK position would be thinking is that obviously Cooper was born in China.
Yep.
And you already talked about some of your experiences of racism and and prejudice and stereotyping because of even just your surname. Was there an awareness of that in some ways you're dislocating this little boy from a country, a culture, faith, community?
You got two things going against you there. So he has Down syndrome, number one, which he is a target in many circumstances. Number two, he's from a different culture. And so it's very clear when you see Cooper that he's Chinese and we're not. And so that's a second thing that he has going for him. And I would probably even add a third one. He's adopted, which oftentimes can be a target for kids to make fun of other kids or for, things to be looked down upon. And so there's three things that are going in the face of that. But what I find is in those circumstances, the trump card, the thing that is bigger or more important than anything is what is it that you are feeling called to do in your heart? And if you feel like you're supposed to do something, it doesn't matter all those other things, the obstacles, the hurdles, the things that are not logical, those things don't matter if you truly feel in your heart, this is what you're supposed to do. Does it make it that it's going to be easy? No. In fact, it's guaranteed to be hard, and it's going to get you way outside your comfort zone, and you're going to experience a lot of internal discomfort. But you know what? There's no growth in the comfort zone, and there's no comfort in the growth zone. So cowboy up, let's go get it done.
If I had a Stetson on, I'd be waving it at that point. I don't. I'm English, you know. I guess my counter to that, if I can add a bit of sandpaper to the conversation, a bit of grit in
Please.
this conversation, is that you answer that question in relation to your experience of difficulty. You highlighted his issues and then said, "But I'm up for that." What would it? I mean, and he's a child, you know, and he's a child with additional needs. So I'm just conscious that you're making all the decisions for this little boy, and you know, what would be to paint me a broader picture? What would be the outcomes for a little boy with Down syndrome in China?
Yeah. So Cooper was found on a street corner in a city of 14 million people in the early morning hours when he was guesstimated to be 6 months old. And so he was, the authorities were called. They came and they picked him up and they took him to an orphanage. And that's where he stayed until we adopted him. And so right now, as you may be aware, international and early adoptions are shut down in China. And so had we not adopted him, Cooper would still be there. He's 11 years old right now. And the reality is it's possible that Cooper would have been fine. And it's possible that Cooper would be happy and that he would be being fed well and he would be living his own little life in his own little orphanage. But here's what would have been missed out. Over the last 6 years, Cooper has done an incredible work, a work here in his family, a work here in his community, and even to the extent a work within our state and even within our nation. Cooper's been featured on different news stations. He's going to throw out the first pitch at a Major League Baseball game this year, the Chicago Cubs. And he is in his own right advocating for children that are just like him. And so I believe Cooper would have been okay had he stayed in the orphanage, but he never would have sung the song that he was meant to sing. And I believe that that's one of the miracles that does come from adoption when done appropriately and in the right context.
Yeah, I mean, if I can be honest, that there's a lot of things there that culturally just kind of go against the UK perspective. So please, I'm not trying to kind of just be asking difficult questions.
That's a beautiful thing is I love it. Like ask all the hard questions. And so anybody that's listening that said, yeah, but this, like ask that question, ask the hardest questions that you want. No offense will ever be taken. Right.
Be careful. I've got a genuine flair for offending people. No, I don't want to do that because I think I look at, you know, and I've watched the podcast, another podcast you were on, just because you sort of invited me to do that. And I think that we can't sort of separate your faith from your perspective and from your decision-making process, can we? And I wouldn't try to. And you've hinted at it.
Yeah, so that's fair.
And that's fine. But I think what I'm thinking about is for Cooper is that I'm dancing around my questions, aren't I? You can see I'm trying to put them in a way that doesn't cause offense.
No
one of the things I see online, right? Okay, well, we can sort it out at the end. One of the criticisms I see of adoption generally, you know, and I'm an adoptive parent, so I'm not sitting here like holier than thou. I see is I said the man with 6 adopted children. It's not a competition, but you're winning. Is that one of the criticisms is that from a faith perspective is that sometimes adopted children can sometimes be seen as trophies of people's righteousness. That actually Cooper's, from an adoptee perspective, you know, a critical adoptee perspective, we'll be going, well, hang on, isn't this little boy, how the age he is and given his additional needs, how much does he know, does he understand, you know, about what role he's playing in your, I'm going to use the word ministry or your project? Is that's an ugly question, but I'll leave it out there.
I think that's a fair question. And really what, maybe if I restate the question and tell me if I'm in the right vein here, the question would be, all right, that's great what you're doing, Brady, and great you're helping these kids, but like, how much of a say does Cooper really have, and has he had in being part of your agenda? And your agenda being, take it from a faith standpoint, you're feeling called to do something to help other kids, and Cooper's just a kind of a tool in the tool belt to help you do what you feel like you're supposed to be doing, your own ministry. And I've heard lots in regards to this term and this concept of like white savior complex, or really you take a typical like Caucasian, or even a Caucasian American that has financial means, that is, really trying to help the world, but in the end, they're just trying to make a name for themselves. Yeah. So that's really what the vein is of what I feel like the question is. And I want to say, I love it. Please keep asking questions of this nature, because I have nothing to hide, and I will openly speak from the heart as to what this is. Here it is. I believe that everybody has the ability to help our teammates. And when I say teammates, I mean other people in the world that are our brothers and our sisters, that are our teammates. I believe that all of us have an opportunity to do something around lifting where we stand. So imagine we have a big piano, and we need to move the piano from this end of the room over to the other end, and we all stand around it. Everybody has to lift where they stand at the same time and in unison as teammates to get that piano to move across to the other side of the room. I believe everybody has the opportunity to lift where they stand. And for me, I felt in my heart, whether somebody is a believer in God, or they believe in karma, or they believe in Buddha, or they believe in energy, or they don't believe in any of that, I believe that everybody in their heart has a conscience, and they know right from wrong. And I believe in my heart, I was being told that I'm supposed to travel to Tianjin, China, and adopt this child. And that as part of doing that, it is going to allow him, not me, allow him to sing the song that he is meant to sing. Because Cooper was placed on the earth for a purpose. The same as you were placed on the earth for a purpose. And that purpose is to help other people, to serve and bless our teammates. And by doing so, that's ultimately how we find the ultimate happiness, how we find the most joy in this life, in the service of others.
I mean, that's a great answer. I'm not sure that was the question.
Okay.
I think it was a
fire away. Give me another question.
I think the way you articulated the question back to me when I asked it, I think that was exactly right. But I'm not sure that. I think it's a good answer.
Okay, good.
But maybe I'm not sure it's the question. The question is about his choice.
Yeah.
And his informed consent.
Yeah. Well,
and it's something that I've vexed around with my own children.
About that, the choice really started. Okay, the choice for Cooper was taken away when he was left on a street corner. Okay, so when referencing choice and Cooper's involvement in this choice, see, he was entrusted to a family in China that ultimately chose to abandon him and leave him on a street corner, which put him into a circumstance where his choices ultimately were removed. The other aspect of this is Cooper was born with a cognitive disability, with Down syndrome, which limits his ability to care for himself. And so that also was not his choice. And so in dealing with the circumstance like Cooper, where he's never going to go out and be gainfully employed and take care of himself, it's not like he would have reached the age of 18 in China and moved out and got a job and got married and moved, forward in his culture. There are limitations that existed within Cooper as it relates to choices. And so that's very different than what I would say with a lot of other adoptees, that myself included, that they would face when dealing with that question of choice. How much involvement did Cooper actually have in the choice that he had? It's a complicated question for sure, but that's my feeling on it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's necessarily an answer. I don't think that there's I could imagine that in my head, I've got two people listening. Some people going, yeah, I get it. Like a pragmatic response to a child who's finds that he doesn't find himself anywhere. He is at the bottom rung. That's where he's at in life. And you've given them an opportunity to make a way out of that. And also, I have no understanding of any sort of social care. Like you say, what happens to a child at 18, like Cooper, or a young person, an adult in China?
Yeah.
No idea. You don't have to, watch the news. Maybe you have got an idea. Yeah. It's pretty grim. But I guess maybe so you're not here to be grilled, you're not here to kind of give an apology for your life. That's not what you signed up for. So I do have some other thoughts, but I will get back to them. So you bring Cooper in, and then you become foster carers. Is that right?
Yeah, we did. Before we share on foster care, because I think that'll open up a whole other opportunity for similar dialogue. I do want to say, so my nonprofit organization, Rod's Heroes, our core mission, the ultimate mission, is to inspire families to keep their children and to have them have the resources that they need in order to keep their children. I believe I have no way of proving this other than it's what I feel in my heart. I believe that Cooper's mother, when she made the decision for her child to be left on that street corner that early morning, I believe that she was doing what she felt like was in the best interest of her child. I have no way of proving that other than what I feel in my heart. And so I have zero judgment to her. I believe someday I hope to get to meet her, or I will get to meet her, whether in this life or in the life to come. And I'm going to give her a great big hug. And I'm going to thank her for giving life and taking care of our little boy for the first 6 months of his life. And she just passed the baton on to us. And together, and I mean this, together as teammates, we are raising this child together. And again, whether I meet her in this life or in the life to come, I love this woman, and I can't wait to put my arm around her and share with her all the things that I've learned about our son.
I think that's a really valid point, isn't it? Because in relation to, it's easy to sit here and have a conversation about what ifs and buts and what if this, but actually the reality is for Cooper that that's the situation. And as you say, that did his mother have a choice? Probably not. Or a choice so restricted, we don't know. And
that's right. We don't know her circumstances. I mean, she's in a culture where one child has been the norm for decades, for generations. And that child is your legacy. Oftentimes that child is how you continue on in life, and they care for their parents. And so to be faced with a child that has Down syndrome, I have no idea how I would have reacted had I been put in the exact same circumstances.
Yeah.
So I have zero judgment towards her. Yeah. So, and so I move on to foster care.
Well, I'm trying to, but I'm still. So I think it is worth noting that because in a part of my thinking was, well, we know now we're moving forwards. When we get to your last child, again, you're hoping to adopt. I find it really interesting that actually your ultimate aspiration is to help children remain with their families, and
that's it. So number one, inspire families to keep children, and to and inspire governments and cultures and society and communities to support families to be able to keep children and raise children. If that doesn't work, then my second ultimate goal would be that child is adopted or brought in by another family member or by a school teacher or by somebody whom they already know and love, and that they get to stay in their community, in their culture, speaking the language they were grown up with, and that is an integral part of who they are. And only only as a last resort, is that a child would be adopted by a family internationally, but the core principle being that every child deserves to be raised in a loving family by loving parents.
Yeah.
That's the core principle.
And I don't think anyone could sort of point at that aspiration, those three principles, or those three, goals, and kind of kick up a fuss, really. And I think oftentimes that people looking into situations like your family life and my family life, they're talking in hypotheticals, ifs and buts, but that's not the reality for our children, is it?
That's right. The core principle being above anything and everything is that every child deserves to be raised in a loving home by loving parents, period.
Yeah.
And we as a society, we as a world have a responsibility to help assure that that happens. And that's going to be done in many different ways for many different people. But that's the core principle of what we're really focused on.
Yeah. Oh, finally, we agree.
This is fun. I love this, by the way. You're great. I'm thankful to
Thank you.
Talking with you.
So tell me then about foster care. So by now you've got 5 children and you've got 2 children with additional needs. Where's the spare time where you think, you know what, we need a hobby?
I'll share with you something I've learned about that. And it's a principle of more leads to more. And so what we find, you could use an exercise example. If somebody does push-ups every single morning, then by doing that week after week, month after month, you're going to be able to do more push-ups. And what I find is more leads to more. And I find that Andrea and I, we leaned into serving and under this belief that every child deserves to be raised in a loving home. We felt called, we felt in our hearts that we were supposed to do foster care. And this was instigated by my wife. This was something that she had actually spoke with me about 21 years ago when we were first married. We were having challenges having biological children with infertility. We went almost 4 years before we had our first child, had multiple miscarriages, and it was a complicated time for us. And that's when Andrea first brought up this idea around foster care. And I remember my reaction to that. It was not only a no, but it was like a heck no. I had a visceral reaction of no, I do not want to do foster care. And so that's how that started 21 years ago. And as things transpire and as my heart softened and as I became maybe more mature in my decision-making process, it came to a point where Andrea came to me again and encouraged me to do what I do when I make these important decisions, which is, as I share, a lot of prayer and meditation and just trying to seek out what I'm supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And I felt in my heart that that was something that we were supposed to do. And so we went through the classes, and it was hard because I've got a full-time job, and then and we've got all these kids, and the classes were in the nights, and I travel a lot for work. Like there was a lot that was associated with that. But in the end, we became eligible, and we became foster parents.
So can you tell me what your reluctance was? Why did you have you talked about a visceral reaction?
Yeah,
no.
I had a lot of, I would say it was driven primarily by fear, and fear of ever putting my other children at risk, fear of what could potentially come as a result of opening up our lives to other parents who had just lost their children. And, we weren't going into foster care to adopt, by the way. We were going into foster children and to help children. Yep. So here in the state of Utah, if a parent is getting a D- grade, I don't know how you guys get graded over there, but a D is really bad. An F is fail, right? But a D- grade, which is like the worst of the worst almost, if they're getting that, they keep their child. It's only when they cross over to complete failure that they lose their child. And so I was fearful of what that could introduce into my family.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I was not educated. I really wasn't educated as to foster care. And those were the reasons why I didn't want to do it. And so once I was able to overcome that and become more educated, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's comparable to the UK, is that a lot of people, when we have lots of sort of lazy stereotypes, don't we, that are just part of our culture and our narrative, the media. But when you get to it, there's kids are kids.
That's right. I love that. You are right.
So you then, so you're then licensed foster carers, and so tell me about the process of, do you get, in the UK, we say to foster carers, would you take this child? And we get a choice in that? Is that the same for you?
That's exactly the same. So I was on a fishing trip with my son, Ridge, who's my middle child. And we were out of town for a week, and we had become licensed foster parents, my wife and I. And I called home one evening and said, "Hey, how's it going?" And Andrea said, "Well, we had family services call, and they said that they have two little girls, ages 2 and 1, that just came into foster care. Their mom was driving through the state, so from a different state, like 10 hours away, driving home, got in a car wreck, was found to be high on drugs and had drugs in the car. And she went to jail, and these little girls needed a place to stay. And they want us to foster them." And I said, "Well, great. What do you think?" And she said, "Well, they're already here. I told them it would be great." I'm like, "All right, no problem. I'm in." And so that was our
never
first
meet.
placement. That's right.
Yeah, that'd be dangerous, our wives together.
Yep.
So you come home from your fishing trip and you discover two little girls. So what, that must have been a new experience.
Yep. The older girl, Willow, was just pretty awesome. Like she was chumming up with the other kids, and they were having a great time. But the little girl, Olivia, she immediately upon seeing me was screaming and ran for Andrea, was holding onto her leg, like clenching onto her leg, shaking. And I hadn't even said a word to her. And I asked, "What's going on?" And she said, "Don't take it personal. Every single time she sees a man, that's how she reacts." And so obviously we don't know the story of what caused that, but we can piece whatever we can together. So we were told these girls were going to be with us for a week, maybe 2 weeks maximum, because they were going to be moved to their proper state where they were. And 2 weeks turned into 3 years, and we adopted them. And so that's kind of how that works sometimes. Something unique about these girls: their father is African-American, he's Black, and their mother is Caucasian. And so in looking at these girls, they definitely look like, and they are, Black. And so that's definitely a unique thing, with a different race being introduced into the mix, with Cooper being from China and our little girls being African-American. And then you got us. And I guess I'm half Latino as well. So we got a good mix going on.
You're like the United Nations. And
that's right.
I mean, my geography of US geography is not great, but Utah's quite is it a white state? Would that be?
No, very much so.
Generally. Yeah.
Very much so.
And so that must raise complications in that you're not anonymous. You can't, your presence demands a question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So have you had problems with that in different places you've gone, or has it raised sort of eyebrows?
No, I mean, I'm sure people have questioned or thought. There has been some funny questions around Andrea, like in doctors' appointments and so forth, and saying, things around, the fathers or something of that nature. And she's like, "No, let me explain." And and so she's had kind of some fun things with that. But by and large, in our community, people are very accepting, and really hasn't created much of an issue. I will say I fully expect that my little girls will experience that, though. I know they'll experience that growing up, and that's a real thing.
Yeah. And so do you, how do you manage that? Is that something that you've given thought to? Because they must be still quite little, but you're preparing them for the world out there.
Yeah, they're 6 and 5. And something that I believe wholeheartedly in is that I made it a point and a commitment before we even had our first placement, that I would never villainize my foster child's parents. I would never say a single thing that's negative. I would never speak poorly about them, because those parents are heroes in my child's eyes. And as I had shared before, I'm a teammate with that parent. And so we've actually become very close with our girl's biological mother. And in fact, she asked us if we would adopt her children. And so after 1.5 years of fostering, she came to us and asked us if we would adopt her children. again, our intention all along was reunification.
Yeah. So that again books this, you sort of, on paper, you could be described as this kind of, this all-American family who's got this, this collection of children from across the world. And also, from a faith perspective, very much that model of, like you say, the white savior. But actually, when you start to scratch beneath the surface, there's a whole lot more going on here, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is. And it started with the day I was born, that I began being trusted with life experiences that prepared me to pay it forward, to serve the pain that I know best. And here I am as a result of parents that allowed me to be able to be part of their family, their life, and not defining whether or not I was their son based on blood. And so that has afforded me life experiences that has got me to a position where I'm paying that forward. I'm serving the pain I know best. And I would expect that many of my children will be adoptive parents as well. And that cycle in a positive way will continue.
Yeah. So I'm doing my maths. I've got a pen and paper, and I believe we're up to 6 children. So come on, how do we get up to 11? So did you then go back to fostering?
7. Yeah, that's 7. So 7? We had the 4 bios.
Yep.
And then we had Cooper. That was 5.
Yep.
Cooper's our boy from China. And then we had 2 little girls from foster care. So we are in the process through our nonprofit. We had the opportunity to travel to Colombia this last year and meet many children who are in desperate need of a family. And again, I want to reemphasize our goal is that these children would be adopted by family members. And if that's not the option, then they would be adopted by a Colombian. And if that's not an option, only worst case scenario would they be adopted internationally. And that's the circumstance with these children that we're adopting. It's a sibling group of 4. In Colombia, children will age out. They get to a certain age and they're no longer eligible for adoption, and they'll split up the family. And so when we met these kids, Andrea and I knew that time was of the essence. And again, it was not logical. It did not make sense. It doesn't make sense on paper, but it made all the sense in our hearts. And so we're proceeding with adopting these children. We hope to have them home late summer, early fall. And they don't speak a lick of English. And I thankfully speak Spanish, but nobody else in my family speaks Spanish. And I know we're in for an adventure and probably a lot of heartache and some challenges for them and for us. But we feel like it's what we're supposed to do. So come what may, we're going to go forward in faith and make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to be a fly in the wall. You should start a documentary.
I'm thinking about it. A YouTube channel or something.
Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting you say that, because just thinking about some of the trouble people have got themselves into by doing that, exactly that, haven't they? When things have got so think long and hard, get some good advice.
I will. I'll answer it if I will only do that if I feel like I'm supposed to do that, and for no other reason, for the betterment of other people and for good.
Yeah. I mean, so in some ways we don't find you at the end of a story. We find you very much in the middle of a story. There's a lot
halftime.
Yeah. Even with the children you've got, there's children with complex needs, even though they may not be biological needs. They've got complex emotional identity,
that's right,
ethnicity needs.
And it impacts our biological kids too. Like it impacts our biological kids just as much as it does our adopted kids. Yeah.
Because I'm a social worker, and I could, in my head, I talk to people and I think, if I was having to do an assessment on this family, what would I find? And it seems to me like you and Andrea, you sound like you must be, it is a full-time job. I mean, parenting's a full-time job, but this seems like that. How do you find the time to go to work? And if I'm being really honest, where do you find the money?
Yeah. And so, great question. I work really hard, and I grew up with nothing, meaning we were not financially well off. Something I have not shared is that my parents, my adoptive father and my mother, divorced when I was 16 years old. and I stayed with my adopted father. And I remember clearly late nights hearing them argue about money. And so that was a contributing factor to them divorcing, is we just were not in a great place. And so when Andrea and I married, I had a negative net worth. I had a student loan, and that's it. That's what I brought to the table. And so I've worked really hard. And as a result of hard work and also just tender mercies, we've been blessed to be able to have a wonderful business that has been able to provide for our financial means. And that's a whole nother podcast that I'd love to share with you on my belief and feelings towards wealth and towards finances. But we have been blessed with some financial means that have allowed us to do this. But I work super hard, and I mean, I don't turn it off. And so the way I've been able to manage through that is I win the morning every morning, and I get up really early, and I spend time in prayer and meditation. I read and seek light and knowledge through different books. I believe wholeheartedly that the person we become is determined by the books we read and the people we surround ourselves with. And then I work out, and I work out really hard. And then I spend the entire day trying to eat clean and take care of myself. And I instill these habits with my children. My children win the morning every morning with me. And it's not perfect by any means. There's tears some mornings, and some mornings there's not. But that's how we manage through it. And it works.
Yeah, well, yeah, clearly it's working, and, it is interesting listening to you talk from a UK perspective. All of that stuff sounds really quite, and we're not, we're culturally miles apart, but it's just really interesting to see it get beneath some of that language and stuff and see that what's going on, and, what is truly a really remarkable family. Tell me where people can kind of hook into the work that you're doing in relation to, supporting families and, children with additional needs.
Thank you for asking. Our website is rods.org, RODS.org. And you can find me on Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram at Brady Murray 21. So at Brady Murray, MURRAY 21. And those are the two best ways to get in touch with us.
Excellent. And I can ask who Rods is. What does Rods stand for?
So that's a whole nother story we haven't even got into. When Andrea and I felt like we needed to help children that have Down syndrome that are orphans, Andrea challenged me at the time to do an Ironman triathlon. And so an Ironman triathlon, I apologize, I only know it in mileage, not in kilometers, but in mileage, it's you swim 2.4 miles, you bike 112 miles, and then you run a marathon. And that's what you do to do an Ironman. And I had never done that before. I had dabbled in small triathlons, and honestly, the thought of doing a full Ironman just scared me to death. I didn't think I could physically do it. But when Andrea challenged me to do that, to raise awareness and funding around this, I felt challenged. I felt called to go and do that. And so I started training. And as I started to train, the news started to pick up on what I was doing, that I was doing an Ironman to help an orphaned kid with Down syndrome. And I learned a very valuable principle during that experience. And that is that when you allow yourself to get caught up in a cause bigger than yourselves, you will witness miracles. And I witnessed a miracle. I'll never forget the day I got a phone call from a man that said, "You don't know me, but we have a lot in common." He said, "I have a son who has Down syndrome. I'm also an Ironman triathlete. And I happen to be the presenting sponsor of this year's Ironman World Championship. And I want to invite you to come to Kona, Hawaii and race in the Ironman World Championship. And we're going to feature your story on NBC, on national and international news media." And that's how we started. And so the organization name started as Racing for Orphans with Down Syndrome, or in other words, RODS, Rods. That's where it came from.
Crikey. you tick so many podcasting boxes. I'm sure there's Iron Man podcasts that you could have on and all kinds of things.
There are. I will say, I literally this last week just finished a book, and it's a 65,000 word book. So that's about 200 pages. Translate that over, and it's in the editor's hands right now. I do plan on publishing that later this year. That basically documents this whole story, because you're right. It's a lot of podcast episodes.
Well, it's been absolutely lovely to hear from you. And I thank you. I really appreciate you being open and honest. And, there's been a bit of grit in some of that stuff. And I'm sure there'll be people with a lot more questions. But thank you so much for your time. And I really wish you and all of your family and, Andrea and all of the children, I wish you absolute blessings and good luck in everything that you put your hands to. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.